At a Jewish leadership conference this past May, a panel of brilliant and renowned scholars was brought together to address a question that I believe really could only be asked at a Jewish conference. What should we worry about next? And apparently, it turns out that Jews have always worried. Worry is built into our legal codes. It's in our liturgy. It's in our literature. Leon Wieseltier said that Jews have worried throughout the ages about external threats, all the people who want to come and kill us, and internal threats, all of the ways that we are killing ourselves. We have worried in times of struggle, and we have worried in times of relative calm. But he says that even when Jewish life in the exile wasn't miserable, it was still precarious, so there was always some justification to worry about something. So basically, we can forgive our grandmothers for their fears that we catch cold if we go outside with wet hair, because it was basically in their DNA to worry for us, and it's also in ours. Today, I know that many of us have come here holding worry. Perhaps this year, more worry than usual. And I want to tell you that I am worried too. But the good news is that we know worry, that worry's in our muscle memory. And my goal today is to take some of that worry and turn it from paralytic into productive, because there's frankly too much at stake in the world today for us to do anything less. So I'll tell you about what I'm worried about today, as if you could not guess. I am worried for the soul of our country. In 1968, Mayor John Lindsay of New York said that this is a drifting and angry America that needs to find its way again. 1968, it was a time of social and political crisis, a time of civil unrest and racial violence, the war in Vietnam, assassinations of great leaders in this country. Our country was torn apart at the seams. And today, those words ring true again. This is a drifting, angry America that needs to find its way again. We are standing on the cusp of a presidential election that we know will redefine the culture and the contours of our nation, and in many ways already has. Regardless of the outcome, this November, this election has mainstreamed xenophobia and hostility. It has enthusiastically surfaced bigotry and racialized hatred that it will take at least a generation to heal. America needs to find its way again. I don't know exactly what Mayor Lindsay meant. Maybe he held some kind of nostalgia for a mythical time in which America had found its way and now only needed to return to that place. But I am personally not interested in returning to some kind of fabled past. The power of this statement is perhaps its assertion that we must find our way again and again and again. The election of 2016 is not unfolding in a vacuum. It unfolds against a backdrop of violence, both abroad and at home. Let me give you just a snapshot of some of these broken edges. How many stories did we hear this summer of Black men who were shot by the police? In Tulsa, in Charlotte, in Falcon Heights, Minnesota, in Baton Rouge. Last week, here in San Diego, with each death, reverberations of trauma pulsing through our country, revelations of the extent of the brokenness of our justice system, which treats Black men like criminals, even when the only crime they commit is walking down the wrong street, or driving with a broken taillight, or selling CDs in a parking lot while being Black. National statistics state that young Black males are 21 times more likely to be shot dead than whites. This crisis is so severe that my friend's church had to put out a video series for young Black men called Get Home Safely, 10 Rules of Survival When Stopped by the Police. Each rule is read by a young African-American child. It could break your heart. You must watch this video. Among the 10 rules are the following. Number 1, be polite and respectful. Remember, your goal is to get home safely. Number 2, do not under any circumstances get into an argument with the police. Number 3, do not make any sudden movements and do not put your hands in your pockets. Number 4, do not run even if you're afraid. Number 5, watch your words, your body language. Remember, your goal is to get home safely. Now, my 7-year-old son is the kind of kid who likes to climb rafters. I have never had to have this talk with my son. All these statistics aside, the story of Charles Kinsey screams the painful depths of the crisis of systemic racism in our country. Charles Kinsey is a behavioral therapist who was working in a mental health center. You may remember the story. He ran outside of the center in July to help a 23-year-old man with autism who had run out of the center. Police ordered Kinsey to the ground, and they shot him 3 times with a high-powered assault rifle, even as he lay on the ground unarmed with both hands in the air. He was shot in the leg and then said the following words, "Sir, why did you shoot me?" And the police officer responded, "I don't know." And I can't escape the thought of the black police officer in Baton Rouge, Montrell Jackson, who was so troubled by this summer's violence that he wrote about the dilemma of being a black cop and posted it on Facebook. Here's what he said: "I swear to God, I love this city, but I wonder if this city loves me. In uniform, I get nasty, hateful looks, and out of uniform, some consider me a threat. These are trying times," he wrote. "Please do not let hate infect your heart. This city must and will get better. I am working these streets," he said, "so any protesters, any officers, any friends or family or whoever, if you see me and you need a hug or want to say a prayer, know that I've got you." 1 week later, Montrell Jackson and 2 other officers were gunned down in an ambush targeting police, a retaliation for the killing of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling. How, I wonder, did this become the norm in America? And even still, for all of the systemic failure that we see, it is a black football player's public act of civil disobedience, kneeling during the national anthem to protest racial injustice, that is the great threat to America today. Even as his jersey is burned on the internet, this man has used his fame in order to shake our nation out of its complacency and its denial, to redefine what patriotism is, not as chest thumping and flag waving, but as loving your country enough to fight for it to live up to its own promises. America desperately needs to find its way again. Even while being suspected of carrying a gun seems to be a death sentence for black men in America, meanwhile, the gun manufacturers and the lobbyists in this country churn out propaganda to promote and protect our gun culture. Did you know that gun sales have skyrocketed more than 30% this year? This is big business. This is big business for the folks who continue to bring in great personal profit despite the 35,000 Americans who are killed every year with their products. After every mass shooting, there is a spike in gun sales and in stock prices. And yet, in the classically American illogic, we're expected to believe that there is no connection between gun proliferation on one hand and gun deaths on the other, and therefore there's absolutely nothing that any of us can do about it. The New York Times put out recently a comparative analysis of gun violence rates between the United States and other countries. Not surprisingly, they found the United States to be an extreme outlier. In Germany, they said, the likelihood of being murdered with a gun is as uncommon as being killed by a falling object here in the United States. In France and China and New Zealand and England, you are as likely to die from gun violence as someone in the United States is to die from falling off a ladder. Is this really what we want America to be? In America today, to challenge the right of a mentally unstable man with a history of beating his wife, who may be on the terror watch list, to purchase an AR-15 is considered nothing short of being un-American. Meanwhile, every other consumer product in this country, from teddy bears to toasters, is regulated by federal health and safety standards. But for us to hold the gun industry to similarly accountable would be a grievous undermining of our Constitution, a threat to our democracy. And we have allowed this to be the case. America needs to find its way again. At the same time, American central and consuming obsession, terrorism, has led to harsh and unrelenting attitudes toward Muslim Americans. It has led to draconian policies regarding immigration of people coming from Muslim countries. It has led to dehumanizing language about Muslim Americans and about Muslim refugees who are fleeing the very same terrorism that we despise. What happened last month in New York and in New Jersey was undeniably terrifying, and we all know the truth is it could have been much worse even than it was. And yet the reality is that most terror attacks that happen in this country since 9/11 are committed by radical anti-government groups, by white Christian supremacists. Those attacks have killed more than twice as many people as radical Islamists, according to the New York Times. America needs to find its way again. In America today, we no longer read articles or engage with people who don't agree with us. Twitter and Facebook have become the play space of marauding cyber villains, spewing their racist, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, misogynistic venom wherever they can. I recently looked up a man who went after me online for posting an article that I found moving because he called me a whore and a Nazi and a bunch of other words I could not say in this holy gym. I think I was curious to know what someone who uses words like that actually looks like. And to be honest, he looked like a nice and normal guy. His profile picture was him with a woman, presumably his wife, and 2 cute kids. But that didn't stop him from trolling for progressive Jews on Facebook and unleashing holy hell on them. I wrote him a private note. I said the following: I got your message. It looks from your profile like you have a sweet life. It might be better for everyone if instead of dumping poison on people you don't know, you read a book to your kids or took your wife out to dinner. I never heard back from him. I'm still waiting. Fear is high. Tolerance is low. Empathy is almost non-existent. Voyeuristic reality TV is now our political reality. In the winter, a studio head said the following: it may not be good for America, but it's damn good for the network. He called this presidential campaign a circus full of bomb throwing, which he hoped would continue, for business sake. Well, 6 months later, business is booming, but we now are a nation of anger, vulgarity, fear, division, distrust, and despair. We are afraid of otherness, of foreignness, of differentness. We have forgotten how to listen, and words like hope and change feel hopelessly naive and outdated. There was one moment over the summer that I believe perfectly captured this. After days of apocalyptic speeches at one of the national conventions, the culmination was a moment where the crowd began to cheer, "Yes, you can. Yes, you can." Did you catch that moment? Because here's what happened. In the space of less than a decade, there has been a shift in American consciousness so profound that we have moved from "yes, we can," an expression of community and shared responsibility and hope and moral imagination, to "yes, you can," an expression of desperation, radical disempowerment, and the need for some big hero to swoop in and save us. For what could we possibly do to save ourselves? America really needs to find its way again. And you might think right now, wow, she's really preaching to the choir today. Well, maybe I am, because sometimes the choir and sometimes the preacher need to say out loud when things have gone terribly wrong in our country. And maybe our job today is not to change hearts, but to strengthen hearts as we move forward. We are now in a moment where half the country is pretty sure that the other half the country has gone completely mad. And that is true, whichever half you actually find yourself in, let alone the fact that our half is actually right. It may be that every generation needs to determine what America we want to live in. We certainly need to determine that today. And this is not only about a presidential election this November. This is about a country actively engaging in reshaping the culture of our people and of our nation. We're here today because Rosh Hashanah is our time to look in the mirror and contend with who we have become and dream again about who and what we would like to be. We do this personally. We take a self-audit of our behaviors. What held me back this past year? What patterns were destructive? Where did I take up too much space? Where did I take too little? We do this with our relationships. Who did I hurt this year? And who hurt me? What have I neglected to see in my partner or my friend? Who have I neglected to honor or prioritize or thank? And we do this globally, looking at our families and our communities and our country, looking at the Jewish people, looking at the world. Ma'anu. Ma'anu is the banner language of High Holy Days. What are we? Who are we? Who do we want to be? And perhaps most importantly, what are we willing to do about it? In other words, how am I and how are we going to find our way again? So allow me to offer the following framework. Many Americans today are consumed by two primary concerns, both of them brought about to some extent by globalization. First is the fear that in a new global economy, with the outsourcing of production and the fast and furious development of new technologies, they have been left behind. Job loss, lack of opportunity, these things have left many people with a fear that they have lost their purpose, that the world has moved on without them. The second is the fear of global terrorism, which has left many people feeling profoundly vulnerable. In other words, there are two driving core fears in our country today. The fear that I cannot provide for my loved ones, and the fear that I cannot protect my loved ones. Both of these are real. Both of these are serious, and they need to be addressed with urgency, with great resources, and with great sensitivity. But rather than deal honestly and responsibly with our growing fears as a nation, they have been exploited by a politics of pessimism that has turned legitimate concerns of marginalization, irrelevance, emasculation, into fear-mongering politics of division. Rather than address the root causes, fear has been hijacked and transformed into anger and resentment and distrust of other people who happen to be equally vulnerable, if not more. This is a gutter politics. Let us call it what it is. A gutter politics forces our gaze downward, plays to our worst inclinations, threatens to destroy the fabric of this country. So what are we to do now? Shortly after crossing the sea, on our way out of hundreds of years of slavery in Egypt, the Israelites were attacked on their journey by a tribe called Amalek, an army that was determined to destroy them. Joshua leads the Israelites in battle against Amalek, and Moses ascends a nearby mountain overlooking the valley where the battle rages on. With all of his strength, and you must remember that Moses is no young man at this point, he lifts his hands up to the heavens. And when he does, his people prevail over their enemies. But eventually he grows weary, and his hands grow heavy, and they start to fall. And as his arms lower, Israel falters. And so Aaron, his brother, and Hur, his companion, they support him, one on each side, holding his hands steady and raised high to the sky throughout the day until the Israelites defeat their enemies in battle. What is going on with Moses' arms? Is this some kind of magic? The Mishnah teaches us that Moses' raised arms are lifted to the heavens in order to keep the people's heads up, in order to cast their gaze toward the heavens and to remind them of the sovereignty of God, which he believed would inspire them to fight harder for the good. In other words, this is not magic. This is called leadership. With a simple upward gesture of Moses' arms, he strengthens the people's resolve, and he says to them, do not become consumed with grief and fear and anger in the midst of this battle, but instead remember to dream, remember to think expansively, and know that this is not the end. Moses' raised arms draw the gaze upward, giving strength of heart and body to persevere. I love the idea that the job of a leader is to remind people to look up and to imagine what's possible. Many people noted this about Shimon Peres last week, that he was that kind of leader, that even well into his 80s and 90s, he always looked to the future, dreaming new dreams, forging new relationships, thinking about what could possibly be, never paralyzed by what is. My friend, a brilliant teacher of Torah, Micha Goodman, is a scholar at Hartman, says that this image of Moses is the perfect message for Rosh Hashanah, a day that's dedicated to lifting our eyes to the heavens. Why? In order to catch the first sliver of light from the new moon. Remember, the lunar month starts in the depths of darkness, and the first trace of light that becomes perceptible is the sign of the new moon, and in this case, the sign of the new month. Micha says that moon watching, searching the sky for hints of light, becomes our great national project, an invitation to look up precisely when darkness threatens to otherwise draw us down and consume us in smallness. Moses and the moon. Moses and the moon, both of them summoning us today out of a politics of pessimism and instead inviting us into a politics of aspiration. A politics of aspiration is not naive. It's not foolish. It's not a sign of weakness. It's about building a fundamentally different culture, one that's honest about the problems that we have and inspired about what we might be able to build. This is how America begins to find its way again. This year has been so destabilizing for so many of us. That's why we spent the last month compiling stories of hope. Our hope was that in bringing together these stories, just as the storm clouds of pessimism and intolerance were rolling in, that this would be more than some sweet exercise, but rather an act of revolutionary love, an act of defiance against a set of cultural and political norms that have come to define this country. My sense is the way that our country begins to find its way again is once we find our dreams and our humanity and our hope again. So I want to close by sharing with you a couple of stories that have given me a sense of hope over the past few months. First, I want to talk about Ezekiel. I want to talk about our 9-year-old open heart surgery pinup model who came out of his 3rd open heart surgery this summer and 3 weeks later showed up in this building for the first day of Limudim, for the first day of religious school. Where that family finds their strength, I do not know. But Ezekiel and his parents and his brother are some of the most extraordinary people I have ever met in my life. And Abigail writes in our booklet this year that what was once called a defect incompatible with life has instead turned out to be the single greatest portal I have ever known to gratitude, love, prayer, community, and joy. She says, to God, I truly bow my head, trembling with awe and gratitude for the blessings. And what about Annette, who writes about her father, a survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto, now 93 years old with 7 great-grandchildren. Annette writes, when someone can experience profound evil and endure extreme pain and suffering and loss, but nevertheless live to experience the joy of loving offspring who are thriving in the world, this gives me hope. And I have to admit, Annette, that this gives me hope too. Some of you might have seen the stunning photo of a woman named Aisha Evans over the summer who was engaged in an act of protest against police violence. There she stands in the middle of the street, composed and serene in this long black flowing dress as two officers in riot gear arrest her. She's 35 years old, an African-American mother, a nurse. This quickly became one of those iconic protest photos. And for me, and for many others, it is a source of great hope to hold such presence as she confronts the reality of systemic racism in this country. This woman's spirit crushes the politics of pessimism. No force in the world can defeat that measure of dignity. And I pray today that Aisha's son grows up in a world where he is not afraid to walk down the street, where his worth and his humanity are questioned by none. Sadly, the politics of aspiration are hardly the hallmark of Washington these days. But there are some brilliant exceptions, and I want to celebrate one. This year, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut led the way in demanding serious reform to our nation's gun laws. And he stood on the floor of the Senate and shared the story of Dylan Hockley, one of the 6-year-old students at Sandy Hook Elementary. Dylan was a little bit special, he said. So he had an aide who was working with him, an exceptional teacher named Anne Marie, whose job it was to help Dylan feel safe in school so that he could learn. When word of the shooting spread, all of the parents gathered together at the local firehouse awaiting information about their children, and Senator Murphy happened to be sitting next to Dylan's mom. She later told the senator that the moment that she realized that her son would not be coming home, the first thought that went through her head was, I need to find Anne Marie. I need to find Anne Marie so that I can find out what happened to Dylan in his final moments alive on this earth. And then in an instant, she realized that there was no way that Anne Marie was coming home either, because there was no way that Anne Marie would have left her child to die alone. She later learned that when the gunman began shooting in the classroom, Anne Marie could have easily made her way out of that room alive. But instead, she ran toward Dylan and she wrapped him up in her body so that the last feeling that he felt in this world was not terror or hatred, but love. Senator Murphy said, it does not take great courage to stand on the Senate floor and demand change. What takes great courage is to manifest love. And that is particularly true in a time of warfare against our greatest values as a people and as a nation. And so for the sake of that teacher, for the sake of that child and all of those parents, for the sake of Alton Sterling's son, Cameron, and Philando Castile's little girl, for the sake of the Dallas police chief, David Brown, who lost 5 members of his force this summer, only 6 years after his own black son was killed in a shootout with police. For the sake of all of them and for the sake of us, it is time for us to do something productive with our worry. It's time for us to stop making jokes about buying property in Canada and instead use our worry to double down on our commitment to help make America find its way again. We need to get on buses, people. We need to canvass. We need to do voter protection at polling places. We need to learn about every one of the 17 propositions that will appear on our ballot because they will affect the lives of real people in this state. And we need to make a commitment to vote not only in November, but in every election, in midterm elections, every time, because we lose the right to complain about what's so broken in this country if all we do is worry and complain and then opt out of the electoral process that just might fix what is broken here. It's time for us to reclaim the extraordinary promise of this country. We are a nation that was built on lofty ideals, beautiful ideals of justice and equality, ideals that did not come close to being met by our founders who penned them, but which nevertheless stubbornly and perpetually lift our gaze toward the promise of a better America. If you think that we are here today and next week to bring an annual guilt offering to the Jewish God of institutional religion, then you are wrong. We are here in order to remind ourselves who we are and who we are called to be. We are here to dream together about what we can build and then to get building. This is the only way that we will begin to find our way again. Shana Tova.